He hasn't spoken a word.
Hello, creeps. It's your old pal, the Crypt Keeper. And you are now tuned in to my good fiends at Talks from the Crypt, the most gruesome podcast in the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't even think I need to give him an introduction. Mr. Bill Moseley in the Crypt today.
Hello.
Bill Moseley, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, my friend.
Yeah.
I was very surprised when you accepted to come on. I wouldn't say surprised. I was more excited than anything. As I was mentioning to you yesterday, I'll never forget the first time I saw House of a Thousand Corpses. I mean, it was a life-changing movie for me. Really pushed me more into the genre than I ever thought that I could be. But before all that happened, you know, I do find it interesting that you came from a town that wasn't really known to act, right? I mean, it was kind of separated from the idea of Hollywood and going and making it in the circus, as you've said before.
Yeah, it wasn't really known for acting, but I managed to get a few gigs in there when I was in maybe fifth grade. We did a school play called Young Christopher Columbus, and I played Diego, Christopher Columbus's son.
Diego Columbus.
Yes, Diego Columbus, and I was led into the gym by an eighth grader who was wearing a bald cap and dressed in friar's robes, and he led me into the gym on a white pony, and I had blue tights and a white blouse and a little black vest, and my one line was, "Bring me a heathen, Father," because Christopher Columbus was up on a set that looked like he was on the bow of a ship, and that was my line.
And you've done play reads the older you got as well.
Yes, my parents actually were involved in something called the Barrington Play Reading Group, and what that was basically, people would like every 6 months, a play would be selected. The different parents in our town would get Samuel French copies of the play. The host would have a dinner party and then turn their living room into the set of whatever play we were doing or my parents were doing. And every once in a while, the play called for kids. And so I got hired a couple of times. Well, hired, I mean, there was no pay or anything. But we did, I think we did a play called The Lottery. We did a play called Sunrise at Campobello. I mean, I did a play. And then my big hit was 1,000 Clowns and I played, that was actually a great movie with Jason Robards. And I played his son, and I ended up, I played the character's son. And I ended up with a tiny Oscar for that.
A tiny Oscar?
Yes, a tiny Oscar.
Did you have to go up and give a speech?
No, I think I just got it and, was very happy with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, who was it in your family that was into it? I mean, who was taking you guys to the play reads?
Well, my parents were both into it. Mom was a real piano player and a writer, a journalist, and an artist. Dad was he was an English major in college, and I think had thoughts of dreams of being the next Ernest Hemingway. But as he used to tell us, responsibility turned him to a less artistic track. Mm-hmm. But every once in a while, whenever he had a chance, he certainly loved to act.
Right. And you said he was like really into Halloween too, right?
He was into Halloween, not the movie.
Yeah. No, right. The holiday.
Yes, he was into the holiday. Dad was a tough guy. He was a Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine, and had been in World War II and also in Korea. And Dad was he was an outdoors guy, hunted, had a bunch of trophy heads on the wall, all that stuff. And he was a pretty tough parent until it came to Halloween. And then he really just had a love of Halloween. I remember one time, and he liked to scare his boys. I come from a family of 3 boys. I'm the middle of 3. And Dad just would set things up and then bring the little kids in the car, and we would just get the crap scared out of us. But I remember one time actually we were Dad pulled into the cemetery in Barrington in the middle of town, and he told us, it was my older brother, his friend Andy Shanehofen, and me. I'm not sure who else was there. I don't think my younger brother was there because he's 5 years younger than me, so he would have been like 3. I don't think that would have been a good idea. But anyway, Dad gave us pieces of paper and chalk or whatever it was, charcoal, and said go do grave rubbings. So he showed us how to do it. You put the paper on the gravestone and you rub it, and then the name of the person buried there, shows up on the paper. So we were off doing our grave rubbing, and it was already spooky. It's Halloween. We're in the cemetery. It's kind of freaky to young kids. And then and all of a sudden, this prowl car shows up and turns its lights and siren on, and we just got completely terrified. Because they're like, we're in there rubbing on gravestones, and suddenly it's the cop. And Andy Shanehofen, my brother's friend, was so scared, he literally bolted, he vaulted over the 4-foot stone wall around the cemetery, and he ran home, which was probably close to 2 miles.
What did you guys do with the grave rubbings, though? I mean,
well, we didn't really do anything. As it turned out, Dad had set this whole thing up. So Dad was mischievous when it came to Halloween. So he had called the cops on you guys. Yeah, he had called the cops and arranged that they would show up and scare us.
That's hilarious.
So that was very funny. Not to Andy Shanehofen, but and not to us actually at the time. But it was just kind of indication of Dad's playfulness.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, I had my mom's a traditional Egyptian woman. She's also kind of, very straight-laced, and she was also very into Halloween. So I find it interesting that Halloween could pull that side out of even the hardest people.
Yeah. No, I mean, my parents were both into it. And of course, I loved it too because of the candy. I loved, the monsters. I loved the pumpkins and the witches. I just loved the whole thing about Halloween. I thought it was a lot of fun. And again, my family, which was kind of tough, really seemed to relax and really get into it. So,
you mentioned in a few of your interviews how you used to sneak off and watch shock theater on a black and white television. Did you have a horror host?
Not that I remember. We didn't have anybody by name. I mean, Shock Theater in Chicago was, I don't know if there was a horror host. I'm sure there was, but I don't remember. Again, I just remember that one scene, in between, like, I don't know if it was like whatever the movie was. I do remember them cutting to a scene like a studio, kind of a stupid studio scene of a mad scientist's laboratory, and there was a table with a sheet over it and a spooky voice saying, and now my greatest creation, Frankenstein. And they pulled back the sheet, and there was like a mug of beer with a hot dog in it.
Was it Zachary?
Frankenstein. No, it wasn't Zachary. I think Zachary was more East Coast.
Yeah, I know Marvin, Svengoolie, and Zachary, I figured were syndicated around Illinois.
Yeah.
But Shock Theater was interesting, because back in, that was the 50s, I believe, when they first sent it out.
Probably.
But it was Universal that sent out 52 movies because the MPAA really cracked down on ratings. I think it was in the 40s. And so at the time, I mean, horror movies were that new. They thought something like Dracula or Frankenstein deserved that kind of thing. So they just weren't able to show it anymore. I think they weren't able to release it in London. So they were like, we can't let these films go to waste. And they just sent it out to all the cities and just had them locally syndicate it. And it was great because these horror hosts like Zachary or Marvin or Svengoolie would take these 60 to 70 minute films and then fill in like a 120 minute time slot for these local TV stations.
Right. Now, it was a lot of fun, but it was also, for me, getting up in the middle of the night and going in and watching, the horror movies that I watched as a kid on black and white TV, black and white movies. The beginning of the end, the giant grasshoppers and, Them and all kinds of really great movies. But I was risking severe corporal punishment. And I knew the hallway. I knew where the creaking boards were, so I would try to step around them. I would go into the library where our TV was and turn it on and just sit there with the volume way down, sitting right in front of the TV, just with an ear open in case I heard the creaking hallway sounds, which meant that one or both parents were coming to get me. So, I suffered from my horror as a kid.
Well, you said fear was your first drug of choice.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, I think that you carried that with you through majority of your life. I mean, when you
well, that's true.
Yeah, well, I'm speaking specifically when you became a teenager and then went off to college, but, you were just bitten by that bug and you end up making, the Texas Chainsaw Manicure. And, what an incredible story, a short film that you put your own money together, you wrote, you make it. It ends up getting into the hands of Tobe Hooper, and I listened to that story and I'm like, that's just insane. Was that the first thing you tried and it just so happened to work? Or did you have a bunch of things that just ended up failing and we just didn't get to see it or hear about it?
I did a bunch of things when I was in New York City. That was the golden age when I was there. I was there from 78 to 86, and that was the golden age of cable television. And New York City had cable TV, but it was very primitive. And they had studios where you could actually show up and put on your own shows on New York public access cable TV. So I was doing I ended up hooking up with Harry Hamlin's half brother Jerome Hamlin, and Jerome had a video camera, so that was very exciting. And so we ended up doing, I guess it was about 8 shows plus 2 kind of greatest hit shows called Video Snacks. And that was in New York City where we shot a bunch of stuff, crazy stuff. Like I remember shooting a girl, in a bathtub wrestling a bluefish. We'd gone down to the fish market and gotten like a bluefish, that's a real name. That's a real fish. And she just, and we, I think we played Too Many Fish in the Sea and just had her wrestling and splashing water and wrestling with this fish. So we did a bunch of stuff like that.
So comedies.
It was, yes, I guess it was definitely comedies.
Yeah.
A guy who went on to be a law professor in New Jersey doing Getting to Know You, singing it to a corpse, played by the daughter of William Styron, a famous author. So, I mean, it was just fun stuff, fun
Right.
little skits. But the Chainsaw Manicure, that was a whole different level of dedication and sophistication, I got to say.
It was still kind of a comedy in some regard. I mean, you
Oh,
tried
yeah.
to sell it to SNL, right?
Yes, I mean, that was the original plan the inspiration came from a kid named John Wright, Wright, from Geneseo, Illinois, who was with me one summer on a ranch, the Boxar Ranch in Cora, Wyoming. And I was out there from New York City just to kind of, I'd been smoking and drinking, going, partying all night. So I went out to this ranch to, try to, just kind of get, stronger, kind of get a little cleaner. And so, and then this kid, John Wright, I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s when I went to this ranch. And John Wright was maybe 16 or 17. He'd been sent there by his parents, who I think were undertakers in Geneseo. And they sent him to the ranch to kind of make a man of him or something. I don't know what their purpose was. But he and I were basically the grunts of the ranch. So we dug the irrigation ditches and just did all the grunt work around the ranch. And we would work under the hot Wyoming summer sun. And he was a sugar freak, even at like 16, 17. So he would do a bunch of frosted flakes and fudgesicles and bug juice. I mean, he was constantly pounding the sugar morning, noon, and night. And when he would get under the hot sun and start doing his manual labor, he would go into what I called the sugar deliriums. And that's when he would start, speaking in tongues and singing top 40 hits and doing character voices from cartoons and commercials. And that was it. That one, I would kind of turn a deaf ear to him. And then one day he was chopping something or digging something. And all of a sudden he said, he was going like, hey, Captain Crunch, doing his crazy shit. And then all of a sudden out of this blather came he was like, Captain Crunch, Texas Chainsaw Manicure. And then he just went on blathering. And I was like, whoa, I heard it. It was one of those moments.
The light bulb.
The light bulb moment. And I heard that and I was like, holy, what? And it just stuck in my head. It was literally like a spear of light, like a lightning bolt. And I went back after we were done with our manual labor. I went back to the bunkhouse and got out a notebook and just sketched out like woman goes to a beauty parlor, gets her hair done, it's under the dryer. Beautician comes over and want anything else. Yeah, I think I'll have a manicure, and the beautician calls to the back of the shop. Out comes Leatherface, starts sewing her, sewing her hands. So that was what I had. And I remember going back to New York City and talking to a really dear friend of mine, a woman named Lori Frank, who was a college classmate and recently deceased, by the way, R.I.P. Lori. But she helped me round out the script, and it was about 5 or 6 minutes worth of script. And she ended up getting a guy named Ed Lockman, who went on to be a famous cinematographer. So he was our camera guy. And she recruited some of her really cool downtown New York friends. Like Cookie Mueller is in it, Mueller. If you look her up on, if you Wikipedia her, she was a famous, downtown writer and died very early, sadly. But so a bunch of cool people, and we took over a beauty parlor on Staten Island one Sunday morning, Sonia's Hair Fashions. And we shot the Texas Chainsaw Manicure. And the idea was that we actually did the editing at Broadway Video, which was the Saturday Night Live editing facility, and got a lot of help. And the idea was to put it up on Saturday Night Live. But they ended up, even when we finished it, they ended up rejecting it. They said it's shot on tape, not on film. They said it doesn't have any of our cast members in it. And they also said that it was too long. And so I was just left with the unhappy prospect of paying back Broadway Video. I think we owed him a couple of G's for doing all the editing and stuff. So, and I remember I would get these calls at like 8 a.m. after I'd been out all night. And there was SNL was very cool. I mean, that Broadway Video is cool, but they had a real hammer to try to collect their debts. Mm-hmm. And this guy was like a very he had like a little tie pin and everything. And he was a tough guy. And he would call me at 8 a.m. and go, "Good morning, Bill. Yes, this is Joe from Broadway Video. We're still looking for that money." And I developed a voice, like this auto voice. And I go, "Hey, yes, good to hear from you. We're working really hard on it and should be having that money any day now." And then he'd go, "Well, thank you very much, Bill." And I'd say, "Oh, yeah, no problem." And then I'd hang up the phone, go back to sleep. But finally, I was working as a freelance writer in New York at the time, and I got a job to go out to L.A. It was a junket, meaning that I think MGM was paying for it. It was to cover the making of the 2001 Space Odyssey sequel called 2010, directed by Peter Hyams. And so MGM, brought me out and, put me up and gave me set tours, and I got to interview people. And so when I was out doing that, I had a friend from prep school. I went to a prep school in Connecticut, a school called Hotchkiss, and it was boarding school. And one of my buddies, Peter Seaman, was already, he and his partner were already like big shot writers in Hollywood because they had written the script for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. They had acquired the property. They turned it into a script. Obviously, Disney bought it or whoever put it out, and it was a big hit. Still is. But anyway, so I called up my friend Pete and said, hey, I'm in town. He said, well, why don't you come out for dinner? And so I came out to his house, outside of L.A., and I brought along The Manicure, which was on 3/4-inch video cassette, one of those things that's about the size of a phone book. And I brought it with me, thinking that I would amuse him. I had no plan beyond that, just to show, I brought it along. Hey, check it out. What do you think? And he and his wife, Nini, just loved The Manicure. And he said to me, hey, look, my writing partner and I have an office across the hall from Tobe Hooper because he's doing Poltergeist. And so if you give me this tape, I'll walk it across the hall and see that he takes a look at it. And that blew my mind. I mean, Tobe, of course, the director of the original Chainsaw.
I mean, is it too good to believe at that point, or are you out of your mind?
I didn't have any thoughts about it other than I hope he likes it. That was about it because I had been, the doors had been, shut in terms of what was I going to do with it. Fridays was kind of the competition. I think the ABC competition for Saturday Night Live. They didn't want it. Saturday Night Live didn't want it. So there wasn't really anything to do with it except for to pay off the debt, and I was working as a waiter at the time to try to pay off that debt, and so anyway, I said sure. So I had another copy of it, of course, and boy, true to his word, he walked it across the hall and showed it and gave it to Tobe. And Tobe, God bless him, popped it into the VHS machine and watched The Manicure and absolutely loved it. And then Tobe told me later that he called in his producing partner, a guy named Steven Spielberg, and showed him The Manicure.
Who's that?
And Steven Spielberg loved The Manicure. And not only did Pete do that for me, but he also got Tobe Hooper's home number from Tobe's secretary, kind of on the down, on the sly. And what Pete told me was, he said, what you should do is to wait for about 10 days and then, call Tobe at home, and see how he liked The Manicure. So I said, okay. So I'd gone back to New York. I waited the 10 days. I called up Tobe. And he answered the phone. And I later learned that was a miracle, that he usually, almost exclusively let any phone call go to the answering machine. But he answered the phone. He goes, hello. And I said, yes, hi, Tobe. Yes, hi, it's me, Bill Moseley. Who? I said, oh, I'm the guy that did the Manicure. And he goes, oh, hell yeah, I love The Manicure, Bill.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, that's great. He goes, yeah, not who played the hitchhiker character, which was my cameo. And I said, well, that was me. And he said, whoa, geez, well, if I ever do a sequel, I'll keep you in mind.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, that's awesome. Great. Well, that's good. And I think he told me to stay in touch. I think I sent him a postcard. He gave me his address, I guess. And I wrote a postcard saying, hey, just keeping in touch. Hope all's well. And I never heard from him. And so 2 years later, that was probably 1984. And 2 years later in 1986, one night, I think it was the night that I had showed up. I still had acting aspirations in New York. So I had answered an ad in backstage, and it called for a dead body. I think it was for a student film, NYU student film. And so I thought, well, geez, I could play a dead body. And anyway, so I went to the location, and it was some kind of a brownstone. It was some kind of a loft or something downtown in New York. And I think it was it was some kind of 4-story walk up. And I smoked cigarettes at the time. And so by the time I got to the top floor, I was, wheezing and panting. And knocked on the door. They let me in. Okay, I'm here for the dead body. Great. Just lie down on the floor and, play dead.
As your audition?
That was my audition. And so I laid down on the floor and tried to be a dead body. But because I'd walked up those 4 flights of stairs, my chest was heaving. And so I wasn't a very convincing dead body with this heaving chest.
And you can't stop breathing.
So I was, and boy, that, in the film work I've done, playing dead is pretty tough. You can't, your nostrils can't flare, your chest can't rise and fall, because I'm one of those people. I'm sure there's millions out there that look for that. Like, wait a minute, Jerry's dead. Well, wait a minute. I saw his foot twitch. I saw his ear wrinkle. I mean, he's not dead. Like his chest. So anyway, I learned my lesson the hard way. I didn't get the job as the dead body. And so I go back to my apartment, and the phone rings. And that was back in the days when there was actually a telephone on a cradle, the whole deal. And I picked up the phone, and this voice said, "Is this Bill Moseley?" And I said, "Yeah." And the person identified themselves as Kit Carson. And Kit Carson, I knew from gossip columns, was a screenwriter in Hollywood, married to Karen Black. They had a kid, Hunter Carson, who starred in Tobe Hooper's Invaders from Mars, also in Paris, Texas. But anyway, so Kit Carson, this is Kit Carson calling, and I'm just thinking to myself, okay, this is a prank, not a good time for it. Who is this really? It's in my head. The one thing I could tell was, back then when you held the phone to your ear, if it was a long distance call, there was a certain sizzle to it. Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking, okay, well, this is a long distance call. And so I said, yeah, it is me. And he said, well, this is Kit Carson. We have a script for Texas Chainsaw 2, and I just wanted to know where to send it. And those are back in the days pre-internet, so in order to get a script to somebody, you had to literally put it in the mail. And so, somehow there was enough evidence that made it like that I played along. And so I gave him my address, 163 West 87th Street in New York. And so he put it in the mail and said, look at the character of Chop Top. So, a couple days later, the script arrived, and I read it, and I thought, holy shit, this is hilarious.
In those 2 years, though, you did something else. You did a film called Endangered Species that I watched. Was your voice dubbed in that movie, by the way? Yes, it was. It was one of my first heartbreaks in show business. There have been many since, but yes, I was the editor of a magazine, like a rag. It was like 32 pages, newspaper pages, called CB Bible. And it was basically small B Bible. And that was everything you wanted to know about citizens band radios. Like, Convoy was a big hit at the time. So there was the CB craze. And so one of my editorials, since I was the editor-in-chief, one of my editorial crusades was about back in the 70s, mid-70s, late 70s, there was this whole craze about cattle mutilations. There was a rash of mysterious cattle mutilations in the western United States. So I was really into it. I had stringers, reporters in different little towns in Colorado, New Mexico, Montana, and they would send me pictures of mutilated cows, like newsprint pictures and articles. And so I was really into it. And still don't know who mutilated those cows, by the way. But allegedly it's aliens.
That's what I think. As they say, farmers from another solar system.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was reading page 6 of the New York Post one day. That's the gossip column. and saw there was a little snippet about this company, Alive Entertainment in Hollywood, was going to do a movie called Cows, C-O-W-S. And it was going to be about mysterious cattle mutilations. And it was being directed by Alan Rudolph, who did a movie called Choose Me. He was mostly kind of groovy art film, love art film. So that was pretty surprising that he was going to do a cattle mutilation movie. Anyway, I just thought, wow. And so I picked up the phone and I called Alive Entertainment in Hollywood. And I asked to speak to, I think they had mentioned the producer, Carolyn Pfeiffer. And I asked to speak to her. And I identified myself as a mutilation expert. And she said, wow. She said, well, I said, is there anything I can do to help the production? And she said, well, there is a scene, a kind of a town hall scene where a lot of the townspeople are passing around photographs of mutilated cows. She said, we'd love to, if you have some pictures, we'd love to use them in the movie. And I said, I do have some pictures. And she said, well, send them to us. I mean, we can't pay you much. Of course, that's a good producer's line for just about everything. And so I said, I don't really need any pay. What I'd like to do is I would like to get into the Screen Actors Guild. And she said, well, we can probably work something out there. So, fast forward to shooting that day in New York City.
Now, in order to do that, you have to have lines, right? It's not like you
have
can't
to
just
have
be an
lines.
extra.
Nope.
Yeah.
And they have to somehow convince SAG that you're an essential actor in the movie. And so I showed up and, got the job as cab driver. And so I have Robert Urich, the star of the show, in the back seat of the cab. And I pull up, he gets out. I say, that'll be $4.75. He hands me a $5, says, keep the change. I go, thanks a lot, bub, or bud, or something like that. And he gets out, end of scene. And then months later, I got invited to a screening in New York City of said movie. And so what I ended up doing was bringing a couple of friends of mine to the screening. And I was very excited because it was, my part was right at the top. And, the movie opens and here comes this cab and I'm very excited. I'm squeezing the hands of my buddies and cab pulls over. And then I hear this like Brooklyn accent say, that'll be $4.75, bud.
Deepest voice ever.
Yeah. I'm like, what? Wait a minute, that's not me. And then Robert Urich gets out, gives me the $5, keep the change, and I go, thanks a lot, bud. And but instead, because in that nanosecond before that second line, I was thinking, well, maybe they didn't mess with the second line, and of course, they did. And so that same Brooklyn accent, thanks a lot, bud, and drives away, and I'm just like. I was crushed. It was like my first, for me, it was like the first, disappointment in show business. I had expectations and, I was cruelly treated, or so I thought.
Yeah.
And I understand that, there's obviously, they're not going to fly me from New York to Los Angeles to do some kind of looping or, ADR, whatever they did. Maybe they wanted a more Brooklyn accent. Maybe there was some problem with the sound. I get what happened, but the impact was indelible.
Yeah. There had to have been a decision, though, like a definitive decision, because, you went from Texas Chainsaw Manicure into Endangered Species, and then you're waiting around for 2 years for Tobe Hooper to call you back. But that's what I can't find in the interviews. And now, I'm starting to think maybe it was just kind of a natural occurrence, or was there kind of a flip of the switch where you were like, this is the career path I want to go down?
It never really was that, because I never really, I didn't never really have time to sit back and think about my career. To this day, I still, I see my career path looking backwards, not looking forwards. I really had no.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that I didn't have a career goal. I wasn't like someday I'll be an actor, like and Gone with the Wind. I'll never go hungry again. I was in New York. I was just having a great time. I was doing whatever it took to earn money. I was working at art galleries downtown. I did a lot of freelance writing. I painted people's apartments. I mean, whatever it took, I just was, I had to earn. And I had such a cheap rent. It's so funny. I look back on it. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in a brownstone. I think I was paying $285 a month.
Jesus.
And I was having trouble making that rent. So that.
Hey, well, with inflation, that's like $2,800 now. So.
Well, I guess so. But so I was never. I didn't really have enough, consistency in my earning to really sit there and go, what would I like to do? Yes, in 5 years, I see myself. I remember when in college and different places where people would say, what's your 5-year plan? I didn't even know what I was going to do the next day. I never really had a 5-year plan.
But that's interesting. That kind of sometimes works out to our favor, right? Just not even putting too much thought into it.
Well, it was basically just going from one gig to the next. Mm-hmm. I did for a while. I worked for a company and read scripts and did like script analysis, and whatever it took. I'd show up and friends would say, "Hey, they're looking for this person or that person," and I'd show up for it and do it. So I didn't really have a career goal in mind. It's funny because I started my acting career really at, I guess I was about 35 when I played Chop Top, when I got the part of Chop Top. And so, or 34 or 35. I don't think I had yet turned 35 that year. But so that was, it's so funny because I see, I talk to so many actors. And they knew they wanted to be an actor when they were a kid. Their parents were helpful. They did plays. They did summer stock. They did, Broadway, off Broadway, off Broadway, all these different things. And in the meantime, I was actually just scrambling and scraping, not acting, but writing and painting apartments and whatever I could do to make my rent. So when I got the part of when we flash forward to getting a call, so Kit Carson had called me, again very early 1986,
and he wrote the screenplay.
He wrote the screenplay for Chainsaw 2, and he. He sent me the script. I read the script. I thought it was hilarious. I called him up. I said, "This is just hilarious. This is great." He goes, "Oh, really? You like it?" We're all, everybody is insecure. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought.
Do you think
hilarious.
You inspired that? The comedy edge to it?
I don't think so. No.
I think you did. Because you sent him Texas Chainsaw Manicure.
Yeah, that's true.
There was the long break.
Yeah.
By then, he had done Eaten Alive, Invaders from Mars, and Poltergeist. 3 pretty serious movies.
Yes, he hadn't done Invaders from Mars. I guess he had, because he had a 3-picture deal with Canon Films, and one of them was Life Force. I think the next one was Invaders from Mars, because I think he was editing that on the set of Chainsaw 2. And then the third, the crown jewel, was going to be Chainsaw 2. And Canon Films, I'm sure, had expected Chainsaw 2, a chainsaw, because the famous Chainsaw Massacre, greatest horror movie ever made. They expected they were going to, really cash in on a sequel to Chainsaw. So anyway, so Kit Carson was very happy that I liked the script.
How did you react to the comedic tone at first?
I thought it was hilarious. I liked it a lot.
You didn't think it steered a little too far away from the first one?
Well, it's interesting because years later, after we did Chainsaw 2, I was at a party in Los Angeles, standing around a pool outdoors and talking to Toby. And that was the first time that Toby told me that he considered the original Chainsaw a comedy. I did not think it was a comedy. I thought it was the scariest movie I'd ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
And
Objectively not a comedy.
yeah, not a comedy. So that kind of blew my mind. So the fact that Chainsaw 2 would even be more comedic and a lot bloodier, of course. There's no real blood in the original Chainsaw. There's a lot of insinuated blood and violence, but you don't really see any blood. And then to bring in Tom Savini, King of Splatter, to do the special effects makeup on Chainsaw 2 was, going way, committing, to an extreme and a different direction. But no, I don't think the Manicure necessarily influenced Kit and Toby. But as we were hanging up, Kit said, "Well, we'll be in touch." So hung up the phone and thought, what does that mean? Still got to pay the rent. And it's funny because I don't know, like a week or two later, not even, I got a call, and it was from the Canon Films legal department. And there was a woman on the phone, and she said, yes, do you want to negotiate your contract? Do you have an agent, or do you want to negotiate your contract? And I was thinking, what contract? What are you even talking about? And I was somehow, agile enough to come up with the line, let me get back to you. And
That must have felt good.
so I was thinking, what are they talking about? What are they doing? What does this mean? But I remember at a Christmas party, maybe a month or two earlier, I had met an agent from William Morris named Risa Shapiro. And so I thought, well, I better give her a call. So I called her up, and I guess I had made enough of an impression so that she took the call. And I told her the situation. I said, Canon Films has called me up. They want to know if I have an agent or want to negotiate a contract. And she said, "Oh, great! I'll call. Give me the number. I'll call him back, and on your behalf." And so she called me back. Risa called me back and said, "Well, they want you for this part, this character called Chop Top." And I went, "Wow, that's amazing." And she said, "Yeah, I mean, I think she prefaced it by saying there's good news and bad news." And she said, the good news is they want you for this part. I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's like a mind blower. She said, yeah. And she said, I said, well, what's the bad news? She said, well, it's a character with a plate in his head. There's prosthetics. So they want you to shave your head. And I went, okay. She said, so I told them you were a working actor and that would, put you on the shelf for 6 months. So they agreed to pay you $5,000 to shave your head. And I'm like, wow. She said, plus, she said, they're only going to pay you scale plus 10. And I didn't really know what that meant. And I said, well, how much is that? She said, oh, I don't know. I think it's $1,600 or $1,700 a week. And I was like, what? Yeah. That's insane.
Yeah, and that's still great money today.
I mean, again, I was having trouble making $285 rent every month.
Yeah.
So that was crazy talk. And so that was it. I mean, they wanted me to shave my head. They were going to give me an extra 5 Gs. And that was the beginning of my, now acting career.
How'd you prepare for such an active role like that? I'd imagine that's a difficult role to fill for your first actual job ever.
Well, I had no idea what was going on. I mean, to me, I was just in some kind of weird cuckoo land. I went down to Austin. They flew me down. That's when I met Tom Savini. That's when I called his makeup shop, the House of Pain.
So you knew who he was at the time?
I didn't really know. No, I didn't really know Tom. But I do, I think maybe I did a little bit. I'm not really sure. But I was not prepared to have my head shaved. I mean, I went down, they said, hey, how's it going? Here, sit in that chair. And then then they just got out the shears and like just electric shears and just shaved my head. And it was really, it freaked me out because I'd never had my head shaved before. And I come from a family of where there's male pattern baldness. And so, losing my hair was always like a childhood phobia. And then just seeing myself with this shaved head was completely weird. And then before I could even really think too much about it, they took this whole bunch of plaster, I think they called it alginate. They had made up this wet plaster, and they put 2 straws in my nose and then just basically packed plaster on my head. So my whole face and head were encased in plaster. And they said, just don't swallow. And it takes about a half an hour for it to set up. So just don't swallow.
Jesus.
And I was like, whoa,
You
what?
probably never wanted to swallow more than after they
Well,
said that.
I had no, it was a complete freak out. I'd never been encased in plaster before and couldn't swallow. And of course, when you can't swallow, of course, you want to swallow. And I did swallow. I don't think it really made that much difference, but it was, but what I did was I remember, and I had to sit there for a half an hour with plaster hardening, completely closing my head, and had to sit there and wait for it to set up. And I remember that I went into some kind of a meditation. I started thinking that I was on the bottom of the ocean. I was just there quietly, still breathing through the straws in my nose. And but I just remember being very calm and just went to a calm place. And finally, time was up. They broke open the head mold, so they had a positive of my head. And they took the mold and they filled it with plaster, and they created a bust, head and shoulders of me. And it's so funny because I was just in Pennsylvania. I was in Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago at a convention. And Tom Savini invited me over to his house in Pittsburgh. In his garden, there is the original bust of me from Chainsaw 2.
Just set up like a lawn gnome?
It's a lawn gnome. It's been outside for 36 years, whatever it's been.
So what's the condition like?
I have a picture of it here, actually.
I'd
I don't
love
know if
to
I
see
can.
it.
Yeah,
And I'll throw it on screen too.
yeah. There it is.
Wow.
Is that wild?
But that's amazing though.
Yeah.
That he still has that.
Yeah, it's on here. So if you go to choptopbbq.com Chop Top Mosley on Instagram, you can see that picture.
Now, I always hear a funny legend about Texas Chainsaw 2 and about they had a warehouse where Savini was storing all of the props and things. And I guess it caught on fire. And the fire department went down to the warehouse to go extinguish the fire. And they thought they walked in on like this house of horrors. There's rotting bodies everywhere and body parts and spider webs. And I don't know, allegedly for the first hour or so, they thought it was real.
Yeah, I had never heard that before, but maybe that did happen.
Myth busted.
Yeah,
See, that's
myth is
what we
busted.
do here, journalism, baby.
I didn't know that one. But anyway, so I remember going back after doing all of that, getting my head mold and teeth mold. They stuck a bunch of plaster in my mouth to get a positive so they could make the teeth. And yeah, I just had no idea what was going on. I do remember that with that bald head, I remember lying on the pillow at the Brook Hollow Motor Inn where we were put up for the duration of the shoot. And I remember it was so weird because I couldn't really roll my head on the pillow because the stubble kept sticking. It was kind of like Velcro. But anyway, what I did with Chop Top was a mixture of fear, and I was just crazy. I was a big fan of of course Ed Neal, and Ed Neal, who played the original Hitchhiker, or the Hitchhiker. There's no original. I mean, he played the Hitchhiker, and he really blew my mind with his performance. And so I basically, so much of Chop Top is based on Ed Neal. I give Ed Neal like a 94.8% credit for inspiring Chop Top. And whatever else I did with it, I don't even know what I was doing. I was just kind of gone. I remember at the end of our shoot, Kit Carson wrote on my script, we missed Bill Moseley for the last 8 weeks or whatever it was. I mean, he was gone, and just basically I was just gone. I've never had so much fun in my life.
At the time, I'm sure no one could imagine how big that would have became.
I don't think so. I mean, we all, Caroline Williams and Bill Johnson played Leatherface, and we were all aware that, and certainly Jim Sedow, the cook, who was the only character that they brought back for the second one. But anyway, we knew that this was 10 years later, and I think that was actually one of the slogans of the advertising was, after a decade of silence, the buzz is back. I think it was actually more like 12 years, because I think it was 74 was Chainsaw 1. So in 86, so it was actually 12 years after. But of course, after a dozen years, it doesn't have the same hammer as after a decade of silence.
Yeah.
But yeah, we all worked and we all contributed, because this was the sequel to a masterpiece. But we had no idea how the movie was going to be received. I just had no experience, so I just didn't know what to expect.
And before it got released, it kept getting an X rating, right? It was hard to get it down to an R.
Well, it got an X rating from the MPAA, and I think they were trying to cut it to make it an R-rated movie. Excuse me, because what happens is, if it's an X-rated movie, all of the big theater chains won't show it. Mm-hmm. They won't. I mean, that's their policy. And so, finally, I think Toby tried to cut it, and the MPAA, had their standards, and finally, I think it was released unrated. And so it didn't really go into as many theaters, I think, as it could have had it been an R-rated movie. But it certainly made the drive-in circuit. Yeah. And I remember seeing it for the first time. I saw it in New York City, and I remember going there with a friend and watching the movie in a theater. It was pretty full, and as the movie played and then the credits rolled, and when the lights came up, my buddy said, "Hey, everybody, look here, this is Chop Top," pointing at me, and I was like, hey. And I was pleased, but I was kind of stage embarrassed. And there was a guy sitting in front of us who turned around, very grim, black leather jacket, turned around and said, "Nice job, man." And he stuck his hand out, I guess, to, shake my hand. And I went for it, and it was a silver claw. He was missing. Yeah, he was missing his hand.
Oh, shit.
So it was like a silver claw. And I remember as a kid, my dad said, I had a similar experience as a child, and my dad had always said, I take what's offered and shake it heartily. So I remember that. So in that moment, the guy had the claw, and so I just grabbed the claw and shook it and said, "Thank you very much."
Was that the film that brought you out to Hollywood? Did you go to LA right after that?
I did, pretty much right after that. Not immediately, but when I was on the set, I remember Kit Carson's literary agent, woman, was on the set, obviously to support Kit or whatever, and it was a set visit. And I remember her saying, "Hey, you're pretty good at this. You ought to come to Hollywood." And that's all I needed to hear. No one else encouraged me. I had no, agents or anything like that. After Chainsaw was over, Risa and I parted ways. I think she was happy for that one gig, but had no intention of carrying me forward. So that was basically the thing that really motivated me was his agent's kind of offhanded compliment. And I thought, yep, that's all I need to hear. Yeah, we're going to California.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the character of Chop Top stuck with you for a while. You talk about how when you got cast into House of a Thousand Corpses, Rob had to pry your hands off of that character. Yeah. Which almost makes me wonder, number one, how did he do that? And, what was the context? Like, how attached to the character you were? And what would the original, what would your iteration of Otis, what would that have looked like?
Well, it would have been I thought Rob had wanted like a Chop Top or like a reheated Chop Top.
Same kind of crackly voice, hunched over.
Yeah, the whole thing. And it was funny because, as I like to demonstrate sometimes, Chop Top was really, the energy was all in the kind of hunched in the shoulders. It was, scratching the plate. It was like, hey, lick my plate, and doing all that stuff. Whereas Otis is more like a fuck you cowboy, big balls, thumbs under the belt buckle, like fuck you.
I've heard you said it was all in the balls.
All in the balls. And so I, thank God that Rob, pried my hands off Chop Top and encouraged me to go from the shoulders down to the balls and, play Otis that way.
And so that must have just really evolved your skill as an actor just in general.
Well, what it evolved was my self-image. I thought of myself more as Chop Top, hunched over, scratching my plate, being skitchy and gitchy and geechy. And Rob saw Otis in me, and before I did. I mean, I didn't even realize, and it, when you look at Otis from House of a Thousand Corpses, it's. I'm not quite the fuck you cowboy that I am in Devil's Rejects. Still, kind of crazy, up in the in my gallery. I've got a total block. I'm trying to, get some juice flowing, and and finally, thanks to Rainn Wilson and Fish Boy, I finally, I'm starting to come out of my artist block. I remember when I came over to Rob's house, we were watching the Super Bowl. I think it was 2005, so January. And that was when Rob said, we're going to do another one. Mm-hmm. This was after House was a success. And that was when he wanted me to grow a beard. I asked him to, sketch that out on a paper plate. We were eating Fritos and potato chips watching the Super Bowl. And so he pulled out a paper plate and wrote, drew this picture of his idea of Otis for Devil's Rejects. And and of course I had him sign it. So I've got my paper plate. I don't even know where it is. It's somewhere. Yeah. I hope my wife hasn't thrown it out. But anyway, so that was, I got a little more, when I got Otis in Devil's Rejects, I always like to say that, with Otis in House of a Thousand Corpses, it was more like, going to the dealer to buy a car, kind of kicking the tires, looking under the hood with Otis. And then with Devil's Rejects, like I bought the car and now I'm taking it out for a spin.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I look at it.
Was that your first time filming on the Universal backlot for House?
Yeah, absolutely.
How was that? That must have been amazing.
Well, it was. It was convenient because, I live right in town. So it was like a pretty convenient commute. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun. I mean, we were right down the street from, the Psycho house on the back lot of Universal. And also we shot, the House of a Thousand Corpses was actually the chicken ranch from Best Little Whorehouse in Texas with Sly Stallone and Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
And so we were occupying that house. That's where we shot the movie.
Which now gets an honorary mention on the tour at Universal Studios.
Yes. And it was so fun to come out every once in a while covered with blood and maybe Mr. Willis's skin. And, and there's a tram of tourists going by, and the tourist, the guide going, and on your right, there the Rob Zombie movie, House of a Thousand Corpses. And we'd wave, all covered with blood and gore, and people would be a little nervous, and that would be during the day. So
Yeah.
it was like pretty scary.
That's incredible. That was one of the questions I had, is if you guys ever, messed with anybody on those trams.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I read in, you guys came out with a vinyl of all three of the soundtracks, and inside there's a little fold out. And Rob says that if you listen closely at a certain part in House of a Thousand Corpses, you could hear the Jaws ride going off. Can you confirm?
I can't because I'm not that sensitive, but it was just down the hill.
I've never,
Yep.
I couldn't find it. I couldn't listen to
Yep.
it. I wondered what the challenges were, because I heard that it was a bit challenging. You guys had to redo a lot of the audio. Mm-hmm. Was it just because it was too loud because of the theme park, all the trams rolling by?
That I don't know either.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
But kind of like Texas Chainsaw 2, House of a Thousand Corpses wasn't initially received very well by the studios. I think when you guys finished that movie, they were like, hey, we're not even able to do this.
Yes. Well, that was back in the days of 9/11. It was back in the days when there was a congressional hearing about studios selling R-rated movies to underage kids. There
And
was
Columbine as well, right?
there was Columbine. There was a lot going on where the general zeitgeist of of America was against a good old fashioned horror movie, and so Universal actually dropped us. So we shot that in 2000. It came out. It was ready for distribution in 2000, and Universal dropped us because it was, I don't know, too scary, or there was the one scene I remember, the scene where I'm about to shoot the deputy, Walton Goggins, down on his knees, and there's like 30 seconds of silence as the camera crane dollies back up, and I'm just holding the gun on poor Walton Goggins, and then after 30 seconds of silence, there's a little pop, and Walton slow motion falls over, and I remember when Rob showed me that scene while we were still shooting the movie, and he and I thought the scene was amazing. I still do, of course. And but what he said was that Universal wanted that cut from the movie because they felt it was glorifying violence against the police or something. And Rob, God bless Rob, he loves to take on the suits, and Rob was like, no, that's staying in the movie. And he fought hard for it. And, of course, it did stay in the movie.
Well, that's what makes the best directors the best. Tarantino is very similar in that way.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to do it my way, or you guys are going to not do this movie at all.
Yeah. And it was Rob's first movie. There were so many different problems. I mean, he overcame a mountain of stuff.
And how are you feeling in this moment? Are you like, holy shit, my big break on this film is done?
Not really. I just don't have that kind of imagination or expectations. I mean, I would probably more now because I've been around showbiz for a while. But back then, I didn't know.
You're just happy to be there.
Just happy to be there. Exactly. Yeah. Just happy to be there. And so for 3 years, we wandered in the wilderness, and finally, in 2003, we got picked up by Lionsgate, and they put us out. I think it was 800 theaters, whatever the initial rollout was, and it was huge. It was huge because people had been wanting to see House of a Thousand Corpses since 2000, because that was back in the days of video cassettes, and so many of the video cassettes would have previews of coming movies. And the House of a Thousand Corpses preview on the video cassettes was very cool. It was misleading because it showed a bunch of guys in hazmat suits in a weird graveyard at night with a bunch of mist, and House of a Thousand Corpses, and everybody's like, oh man, I can't wait to see that. Rob Zombie, that's going to be cool. And it never came out. So there was that, and that probably created some kind of mythology or certainly an expectation. So when it finally did come out, like everybody was like, running to the theaters. And we, I think, I remember Sid using this fact. I'm not sure exactly, but apparently opening weekend, we made back our budget. So we already, we were like in profit, as it were, after that opening weekend. And so Lionsgate had taken a gamble on it and had won big. And that's what, of course, launched Devil's Rejects.
Yeah.
They were ready for a sequel.
Which some people look at Devil's Rejects almost as kind of like a do-over of House of a Thousand Corpses, because it kind of gets, House gets a little bit of a bad rap, especially with the whole Dr. Satan narrative and how that didn't carry through to Devil's Rejects. Mm-hmm. Did you agree with that choice, or were you kind of, you didn't care?
I didn't really care. Again, that wasn't really anything I was particularly concerned about. Yeah. Rob apparently wanted to keep the thing gritty and real, and Dr. Satan looked a little unreal. Also, there was a scene, I think, where Tiny speaks, and I think he wanted to delete that too. So he basically made sure he pared it down to, the gritty, groovy Devil's Rejects that appeared on the big screen.
And so that also explains why you look a bit different in that movie as well.
And it's kind of funny how that's when I thought Rob was really not just a good filmmaker, but a genius, because he took the opportunity. Usually in horror films, like if you make a sequel, it's because the original was made a bunch of money, and then you want the sequel. Basically, a lot of times is kind of a rehash of the first one, just trying to draw in that same crowd. But with Devil's Rejects, it was like a completely different movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, House of a Thousand Corpses is an old dark house, classic horror movie structure. Kids break down, go into the house, and they get tortured and killed, and maybe one or two escape, maybe not. But Devil's Rejects was a violent crime road picture. And it's so funny because in Devil's Rejects, Baby doesn't do her laugh. Maybe she does it once. Mm. She's not going, whatever that particular baby laugh is that I can't do.
Pretty good one, though.
And then, Sid is out of, the clown makeup for pretty much the whole movie.
Yeah.
And Otis goes from an albino to a bearded Allman Brother.
Yeah, or Manson.
Yeah, and so again the whole paradigm shifts from old dark house to violent road picture.
Yeah, get out of the old dark house.
Yeah, get out of the old dark house.
Yeah,
out to the Kahiki Palms Motel.
Yeah,
out to Lancaster. Yeah,
which that scene includes probably one of the most difficult scenes to watch in that movie. You and Priscilla Barnes, even as a trained actor, I'm sure that was fairly difficult. How well did you and Priscilla know each other when you guys were filming that scene?
We didn't know each other that well. Priscilla was really a great actor and very game for the scene. Sometimes, in a scene like that, understandably, a lot of people would be reluctant to do the scene. They would, and I was reluctant to do the scene myself.
When you first read the screenplay, or it took up until the day of shooting?
It's so funny because when I first read the screenplay and I saw that scene, I remember being afraid of it. And I remember showing it to my wife. I said, honey, why don't you take a look at this? And what I was half hoping for was that my wife, Lucinda, would say, that's a pretty crazy scene, and if you do that, we're through. That's kind of what I was, so that I could go to Rob and say, hey, look, I can't do that scene. I'm going to get to, we weren't married at the time, but I'm going to separate from my
So if
girlfriend.
She had a problem with it, you would have
Yeah,
said
that's what I was
it.
hoping. Yeah. I was hoping because I was afraid of the scene, and I was hoping that I would have that excuse. not to do it. And I remember she read the scene. You know, my wife's an actor, Lucinda Jenny. She's been in, you know, all kinds of great movies, Thelma and Louise, you know, et cetera, et cetera. If you
She
look
was
her
in
up.
Exit Humanity as well, right? Or was it?
No, she was in Three from Hell.
But she was in River.
Oh, Rogue River.
Rogue
Yes,
River, yeah.
very cool. Yes, that was a lot of fun. But anyway, so and she read that scene and she shut the script. She handed it back to me and said, "It's a great scene for an actor." And I remember thinking, "Wow, that is a good way to look at it."
What did it mean to you? Like, how did you break that down in your head?
What that meant was that she wasn't gonna you know, take it personally and hold it against me.
Well, I meant on the acting
Yeah.
side, right? Like you had to have snapped into it and been like, "Oh yeah, this is what we do." You know, that is what art is.
Well, it was funny because we did, you know, when I remember on that day that we were shooting that scene, you know, I was driving to work outside of LA and I was really nervous about the scene. So I remember pulling over, talking to a friend. Friend suggested meditating. So I meditated and I was back in on a lake in Wisconsin, the old fishing hole, and I was lying on a raft that had like a little slide on it, you know, a fun aquatic raft, and looking down through the cracks in the raft and seeing shadows of bass hiding under the raft. And anyway, so you know, I whatever came out of seeing the shadows of fish under a raft in my meditation, you know, I showed up on set. And ready to go. And we were shooting the scene, and I had my scene with Priscilla, whereas, "Come on, Mama," and, you know, we, you know, take it off, and, you know, then we're talking, and I'm asking her to do a bunch of different things, and got my gun, you know, going into her panties, and doing this whole scene. And it was amazing. And when we were finished, when Rob said cut the first time we did it, I just felt so bad, like in my gut, like, you know, because that's not my usual approach in person, you know, which might be disappointing.
Yeah.
But
I actually did see someone comment on your post the other day of
Right.
Otis from Devil's Rejects. They put, "My movie crush."
yes,
I was like, oh, what an interesting crush to have.
yeah. Oh well, you know, I mean, you know, Otis appeals to a lot of people there. So, but anyway, I felt bad after the scene, and I remember walking off the set, and I remember there was a bunch of women in Video Village watching on the video from what we were shooting on the set, and a lot of them really looked like they were, you know, really bummed out. And I felt bummed out. And I remember walking over to Rob and saying, "Oh man, I feel bad." And that was, you know, and I think about, like, what could he have said in that situation? If he were my dad, he would have said, you know, "Suck it up," you know, "Get down and give me 10.
Yeah.
If it were somebody that was, you know, hypersensitive, they would have said, "Oh, it's okay. Like, let's talk about it. Give me a hug." I don't know, whatever. But Rob looked at me and said, "Art is not safe." And that was a really important moment, because that was exactly the right thing to say. Because what it told me was, we're not going for just a cheesy sequel to a moneymaker. We're making art here. We're going in a whole different direction. This is really, you know, cool stuff, and this is art. And I had always thought, I think up until that moment, I had always thought that art was safe, that art was paintings on a wall, that art was big-eyed kids on a velvet screen at your supermarket. You know, I didn't know. You know, it really didn't have a sense of art being dangerous. And when he said that, it was really important. It was like, wow, art is not safe. We're making art, and it's not safe. I was like, wow. And, you know, then it was time to get back in there and, you know, do take number 2. And, you know, as I mentioned, there were a bunch of different camera angles. for that shot. Each one, there's several takes, probably per shot. So I think probably by the end of the day or the end of that scene, we had shot that scene maybe 20 times.
Jesus.
And each time was different. Priscilla was amazing. That it was real. And I remember Priscilla at the end of the day saying that it was like the best scene she'd ever done. And, Priscilla had worked with Jack Nicholson. She obviously was on the TV show Three's Company. I mean, Priscilla had a lot of work under her belt. And for her to say that was a real, that was kind of the icing on the cake, because it was an amazing scene, and because it was scary, and yet when we got into it, and we stayed into it, and each take was equally full, and that was if that's one of the few things I take away from Devil's Rejects, that scene was amazing, and it really cherished.
Well, your guys' portrayal of the characters, it's got to be hard playing such despicable characters, yet still somehow winning the audience over. And I think, obviously that's due in part to your portrayal of the characters and then Rob's dialogue, because I think immediately following that scene, you take the guys out to go get the guns.
Yeah.
But following that scene is you guys in the truck eating ice cream. And it's like the audience is in the truck with you guys laughing and eating ice cream as well. And you almost completely forget what you just saw.
Well, I think it's that scene, which was, an amazing scene, but that scene was something that a lot of families can relate to. Mm-hmm. Can we stop for ice cream? No, we got to, and come on. Oh, just stop for let the girl have some ice cream, and no ice cream in your fucking future. And I think I'm going to have me some Tutti fucking Fruity. We just had a ball with that scene.
Were you guys eating actual ice cream, or was it movie ice cream?
No, that was real ice cream. In fact, there was one take where I'm trying to get, we have stopped for ice cream. Now, Baby and Captain Spaulding are having their ice cream. I'm pissed. I'm driving, and Baby offers me some ice cream, and I'm pushing it away. And one take end up with the ice cream cone like touching my nose and leaving a little bit of ice cream on the tip of my nose. And that's, of course, the take that Rob used in the movie.
Yeah. And so, once Devil's Rejects wrapped, I think that movie was pretty well received right when it came out. And I think it's, probably top 20 horror movies of all time. But according to the end of the movie, you guys were completely dead. You and Sid actually had, a running joke to people asking you if there was ever going to be a sequel. The hard answer was no. But then...
yeah, because we're fucking dead.
People would come up and say, is there going to be a part 3? And I would look at Bill and say, Bill, is there going to be a part 3? And he goes, no.
Nope.
And I said, why?
Because we're fucking dead.
So when you were pitched Devil's Rejects, you were at a Super Bowl party at Rob's. When you were pitched 3 from Hell, was it similar? You guys just personally met up and he's like, hey, I've got this idea that I want you guys to be a part of?
I think he maybe called and said, we want to do another one of these. And I remember the one thing I did ask was, I said, hey, that sounds great. Looking forward to doing it, et cetera, et cetera. And then I said, and he was really just beginning to work on the script. And I said, hey, if you don't mind, can you, maybe you could find a part for my wife, Lucinda, Rain Man, he knows Lucinda. So he said, yeah, I'll see what I can do. And I put it in a way so that if he didn't do it, it wasn't like a deal breaker, just kind of, casual, hey, by the way. And so a month or two later, he called up and said, well, I finished the script. And I said, oh, that's awesome, man. He goes, yeah, and by the way, I made a part for Lucinda. And I said, oh, that's great. What great news. He said, well, I got even better news for you. I said, what was that? And he goes, you get to kill her.
You get to skin her face.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So cutting off her face. Yeah, Lucinda wasn't as excited about that, but she was really good in that scene.
A lot of hours in the makeup chair, I would imagine too.
No. That was my only regret for that scene was that Lucinda took a face full of brains because Bill Oberst Jr., her partner in that scene, gets blasted by a shotgun.
And her reaction to that in the movie is incredible.
It's amazing. And what's amazing about that was that there she is. She knows that she's talking to the special effects makeup guys who were right off camera. They are preparing this, it's supposed to be, brains and skull splattering on her face. And so, and she was told, look, you got to do this in one take because, time is money, et cetera, et cetera. And so she was very smart. She talked to the special effects makeup guys and said, so what are you going to, spray into my face? And they said, well, it's there's food coloring. It's basically pulpy banana. That's a good brain substitute. And so they basically showed her what the concoction was. And so she knew it was coming. It's a close-up pretty much. And what you have to avoid in a situation like that is anticipating. Now, you're going to have, they're going to do something and a bunch of brains is going to blow into your face. Maybe some gets in your eye. It's it's right there. And so she got calm and knew it was coming, knew it wasn't going to hurt her, and knew that they couldn't do a second take because that would involve cleaning her up, reloading the thing. That's another 15, 20 minutes, 30 maybe. And so she just sat there in the scene and all of a sudden, bang, this stuff comes on her face. She was really good in it. My only problem was that because of time constraints, they didn't have time to make her up as the person whose face gets cut off. Because I think she would have been great groaning because that person was still alive. Mm-hmm. And what they had done was they used another person with, that had been sitting in the chair and getting made up as the skinned face person.
Ah, so it wasn't her.
No.
Very interesting.
Didn't have the time.
That's also a portion of acting you never really think about, like getting shot in the face with a blood cannon.
Yeah.
The anticipation of that is what you have to watch out for.
Can't do it.
It'd be hard not to flinch. How hard are those cannons?
Well, I mean, obviously it's enough to, it's not gentle. So that's what I was so impressed with her.
Yeah. Yeah, she did wonderful.
Yeah, she did a great job with Bill, in her character Nebraska. Mm-hmm. But I was also really proud of her to take a bunch of brains in the face without flinching.
Yeah.
Without anticipating.
How early on did you get the screenplay before shooting?
Maybe a month or two. I don't know.
Oh, so it was
really don't know.
Yeah. Because, with Sid's health kind of diminishing as the progress of that movie was nearing production, the script was completely different. It was supposed to be you three the entire time.
Yeah.
And then obviously Richard Brake steps in and he did a wonderful job.
Yes.
But it almost makes you wonder, what would it have been with Spalding the entire time?
Well, I think it would have been completely different, certainly. How that would have played out, I don't know.
Yeah, like the scene with Mr. Baggy Britches in the house where you guys murder him. I'll watch that movie and think, was Spalding supposed to be in the scene the whole time? Or you guys supposed to be in that house together? Because the dynamic would have been totally different.
Yeah. Imagine if Sid is going, now that's no way to play a clown.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would have been a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly.
From what I had heard, Sid not being able to, participate in the whole film, put the film in jeopardy. And Rob was trying to figure out who would replace Sid. I think, he mentioned Richard Brake. And that was like the people that, the producers, the money people, the studios, That was maybe the only person that they would have, that they would give the green light to. So everybody was totally on board with Richard Brake. I think he was shooting a movie in Spain or something, and Rob texted him like, "Hey, can you fly back and be on set like the day after tomorrow," or whatever it was, and Richard was able to do that, and he showed up. I immediately just chatted with him. I had a great rapport, and he really saved that movie.
And you guys had to do it in 20 days, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that must have been fucking difficult.
It was at first, because I was in my head, I was thinking, because, that was 2019 maybe, and Devil's Rejects was 2005. So that was 14 years. And so I'm trying to think, okay, here's Otis. Otis has been in jail for 14 years, solitary confinement, crazy, whatever is going on here. What would Otis be like 14 years later after being in a cage for 14 years? And I started to kind of get in my head about it, trying to figure it out. And the first day of shooting, I remember it was a scene. I'm in a dark blue jumpsuit. I'm in the back of a police van, with my chains on. And I think they open the doors of the van, and I stand up, and there's a bunch of reporters, and I'm addressing them, doing some kind of Otis bluster. And we started, Rob said action, and I'm starting to say, it's like a mini monologue, and I'm starting to say it, and I flub a line. So I was like, cut. Okay, let's reset. Try it again. Action. So I come out, and I'm addressing the group of reporters or whatever. Flub a line again.
You remember what the line was?
I don't, but it was just part of whatever. I don't think it was the same line. It was the second line, another line. And Rob goes, Bill. And I said, give me a second. And I sat down in the back of the van by myself, and I just thought, tried to be, relax. And I heard this voice in my head that said, get out of the way, Hollywood actor. I got this. Mm-hmm. And it was the voice of Otis. And I think what had happened was I was concerned about lines. I was concerned about, I don't think I was really concerned about how I looked or anything. I'm not one of those guys, but it was about lines. It was about, how am I acting? And it was like actory stuff. And this voice just said, get out of the way. I got this. And it was the voice of Otis. And, so I said, okay, I'm ready to go. The back door is open, and I'm addressing the group, and never had a problem after that.
Yeah.
Just went totally smoothly. Just get out of the way. That is, if there's any advice to young actors, get out of the way.
Yeah.
Don't worry about which is my best side and what's that line and all of that stuff that keeps us from being the character and being real in the moment, all that kind of stuff.
And I'd imagine with a character like Otis, you have to be, fairly attentive to, especially with Rob's dialogue, being as, packed in as it is.
Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, it's the character, it's the voice of the character. And Rob created that character. So the dialogue is always consistent.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, strange, certainly, but it is consistent.
It's
so
good. It's punchy.
It's fucking awesome.
They read like lyrics.
Yeah. No, it's totally awesome.
Yeah.
The jail, the behind the bars, my soliloquy to the video camera, was really, it's an amazing, piece of dialogue.
That was shot in the same prison that Susan Atkins confessed to Ronnie Howard about the Manson murders, right?
It may well have been. Yeah, it was a former women's prison that, like a lot of prisons and a lot of schools, institutions got shut down, I guess, for asbestos or something, or maybe they built a new, more modern facility for the women or whatever. But yeah, that may well have been.
That's very interesting, man. I mean, to think about it, you've worked with Clint Eastwood, Sam Raimi, Tobe Hooper, Rob Zombie. I mean, it's like you're fucking collecting Infinity Stones.
I guess so.
It's like now I wonder who is your last Infinity Stone? Like, what is, I guess, dead or alive?
There's a bunch of people I'd love to work with, but we'll see if that happens or not.
Yeah. And let's, I guess, kind of go a little bit before 3 from Hell. So you did House of a Thousand Corpses. Was that what shot you into the absolute, atmosphere of stardom in the horror genre? Or would you say it was more Devil's Rejects? Well, I mean, because, Chop Top takes a big piece of that cake, and I'm not overlooking him by any means, but I think Otis brought you to a new generation of kids like myself.
Right. Both House and Devil's Rejects, that combined, that was the first time I'd ever played the same character more than once. So that was very cool.
Released though, right? Because you did Chop Top once before.
Never really played Chop Top, certainly not in the Chainsaw, in the feature film Chainsaw franchise. No.
Features, yeah.
Yeah, because when they did Chainsaw 3, there was no Chop Top. I mean, Chop Top was
All American Massacre was, you reprised it in that, but it was a little short and it wasn't a feature.
It wasn't a feature, and it was really kind of a backyard. Started out as a backyard. It was supposed to be an example of William, aka Tony Hooper's CGI ability. He was supposed to show off, and that was the kernel of the idea behind All American Massacre. Mm-hmm. That he was going to, do some little scenario and show his editing techniques, somehow his computer graphics techniques, and it just kind of grew and grew and grew, and we ended up, Buckethead, my favorite guitar player in the world, Buckethead played Leatherface with a fat suit. It was really cool to actually visit Chop Top again 10 years after Chainsaw 2. Yeah. And that for those 10 years, I'd been in a mental penitentiary. And it was kind of like, there was a film crew that shows up at the mental penitentiary, and they want to interview Chop Top, and they want to talk about, his origins. And then it turns into a flashback. Sorry. And, it was very cool. I loved working with Tony. Loved working with Buckethead, of course, and my buddy, all the people that worked on that film were really, really fun, really into it. There was no pay, basically. It was just, helping out a friend. And but I got to say that the makeup artist that did my Chop Top makeup was a guy named Todd Bates, and Todd was a big was a professional makeup guy and a big Chainsaw 2 fan. And right after I had done All American Massacre, I just did a couple days on it. I got a call from a friend at Universal Studios asking if I wanted to MC a little horror award show called the Igor Awards. And it was outdoors. It was like a little, 3-foot stage, more like a platform, bunch of folding chairs. And it was basically put on by Universal to given a little funny demon statue to Universal people who had been in horror movies or something. And so I said, sure. They let me come as Chop Top. So I emceed the show as Chop Top. Todd Bates did the Chop Top makeup. And was at that funny little show where one of the award recipients was Rob Zombie. So that was October of '99. So thanks to Todd doing the Chop Top makeup and me emceeing the show as Chop Top, that's when Rob came out to get his award and was like, awestruck that here's it's Chop Top.
If anyone had ever told me that a guy from Chainsaw 2 would hand me a little demon statue someday, I would have said, you're crazy.
He told me later, he thought backstage, he was listening to me, and he thought, yeah, that guy's doing a decent Chop Top.
He said decent to you?
Yeah, decent. Yeah, he was doing a decent Chop Top. And then he comes out, and it's like, holy shit, it's Chop Top.
Yeah. Well, to your benefit, I've heard many interviews with him, and he says, who's that guy doing such a great Chop Top impersonation? So you definitely impressed him on that one.
Well, I mean, he came out and he realized, holy shit, it's Chop Top. And, we talked backstage after the show. I had my older daughter and her little girlfriend. I think they were like 13 or 14, big Rob Zombie fans. So they were, I was getting, a lot of daddy points.
Yeah.
Bringing them along and doing this whole thing. But about a month after that Igor Awards was when I got a call from Rob's manager, Andy Gould, called me at home and said, would you like to be in this movie that he's going to do called House of a Thousand Corpses? And as an actor, sure. If he'd called up and said, would you like to play, a maintenance man in a commercial, I would have gone, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's work. So I had really no idea what that meant. And then they sent over a copy of the script, and I looked at the part look at the part of Otis Driftwood. And so I was like, okay. So I was reading the script and going, wow, Otis, that's a big part.
Yeah.
So that was that was my initial reaction, just, really not particularly imaginative, but I was like, good. Yeah, that's a lot of work. That's good.
How do you prepare for your characters? Like after you receive a screenplay, what's your method?
Just read the screenplay a bunch of times and just, again, there's that meditation again. Just sit with it and make it real. And what that means is simply that, you read it enough so that you kind of fill in the blanks. So if I am Chop Top, I read this story. I mean, I get from the dialogue, he's crazy. This is a cannibal family. They're Texan. Grandpa was a one-hitter. I knew all of that, the background of the original Chainsaw. And what I do is I just make it real. Our lair, the fact that we sell, these croissant sandwiches full of human meat. It's in the meat. So I kind of get all of that. I was in Vietnam. I got a head wound. I got released from the Army. I got some money from my head wound, which actually went to buy the Rolling Gorilla Go-Go and kind of finance our whole family business. You kind of get into it so that you make that world real to yourself.
Is a part of the art of it to almost forget that you're acting? Like, is there?
Oh yeah.
In those scenes, you have to completely be unaware of the fact that you're acting.
No, you can't, because you have to hit your marks. You have to remember your dialogue because you're in it with other people and they're waiting for a cue. Like you say, I'm going to the store, and they say, no, you're not. Well, if you don't say store, they don't know what to say in response. So you have to know. You have to know where you are. You have to know where the cameras are. You have to hit your marks on the floor. Maybe they put a little piece of tape and say, walk over and stop right here. So it's very technical. And given that, you have to forget that you're acting.
I can't even wrap my head around how you could memorize a 120 page screenplay. Like, is it broken down scene by scene?
Yeah, it's broken down scene by scene. There's something called a call sheet. It tells you what scenes you're going to be shooting that day. And they're very seldom are they in sequence. So you really have to know where you are energy-wise and character-wise, story-wise.
I'd imagine that makes it more difficult too.
It can, sure. So you have to, but the nice thing about having a call sheet is we're going to shoot 49, scene 62, scene 17 and 18. So at least you have that idea. You know what to prepare for. So once you've done your initial work of reading the script a bunch of times and getting the general idea, then you're going to do scene 49. And you might have a completely different energy than scene 1 or 2. So you just have to basically, do that same kind of work, for scene 49. What I do is and usually they give you something called the sides, which are basically the script pages of those scenes that you're going to be shooting. So I have those. Usually I, put them in my back pocket, try not to show them to the audience. And when they're getting ready to shoot, between shots, you can look, can refresh, look down at your sides, go, okay, oh, that's right. stick it back and action. So, and you,
Yeah.
presumably, hopefully remember the lines. And sometimes you screw them up. And sometimes you either, you can maybe improv your way around it. Or if not, then what you do is the director calls cut. Say, Bill, time is money, man.
Yeah.
Got to know those lines. I know them, and whatever else is going on, you put the sides back out of your pocket going, oh, yeah.
Now, what do you think, like, if you hadn't gotten into Hollywood, what do you think you would be doing?
I think I'd still be writing. I used to work for a magazine called Omni, among other magazines in New York. And my bread and butter was interviewing famous scientists. And so it was kind of like the Playboy interview. It was the Omni interview with these different scientists. Like Linus Pauling, I interviewed Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb.
Wow. What did he have to say?
He didn't like me very much.
Oh, Jesus. What happened with that?
He just, he thought I was, I don't know. I think he was more used to more formal interviews and interviewers. But we had something of a rapport, but he didn't particularly like me. Linus Pauling, it was very funny because he's considered the father of vitamin C, vitamin megadoses. And I think the only man, at least at the time, to win 2 unshared Nobel Prizes.
Wow.
And I interviewed him right after I had come from Texas getting my head shaved before the start of Chainsaw 2. So I showed up. I had borrowed my brother's car. Linus Pauling lived in Big Sur on the coast of California. And I had borrowed my brother's car to go down and interview Linus Pauling. My brother's car had a sunroof, and my head was completely shaved, and it was California, so I ended up getting a sunburned head. I parked at the top of Linus's driveway off, Pacific Route 1, and I got out of the car to push a button on his gate, and as I got out of the car door shut. And I couldn't get back in. And so, the gate buzzed open, but, there was nothing I could do. So I hopped over the gate and I walked down. It's about a 1/4-mile driveway, long driveway. And I walk all the way down to the house, ring the doorbell. Linus Pauling opens the door. Yes. And my first words to him were, can I borrow a coat hanger? So that was really the first chop top moment.
Yeah.
And he kind of looked at me askance and, gave me a coat hanger. And I walked all the way back up to the car and got back into the car and, drove down and interviewed him.
Do you still write a lot?
I do. I write, right now I just write, stuff on Facebook. I keep not really a journal. I call it a ledger. And I just write down the bullet points of my day every day. I write down the first bird I see. That keeps me from looking at my shoes and looking up. And I write down 3 things I did well, 3 things I could have done better, and 3 things for which I am grateful. And the rule is that I never say the same thing twice. So I can't just say, I'm grateful for my foot again today. It's like, it's got to be something new.
Now, are these like almost rituals to kind of unwind your mind from playing so many demented characters?
No. I love my characters. No, I do it because, in my head, I haven't really done much. My head can say, geez, you haven't done anything. You're,
Only 140 movies.
Well, I'm just saying that, that's how my head operates. Like, yeah, what have you done today? You're not. Yeah. And so by keeping a ledger, it serves a lot of purposes, one of which is to go back and just say, look, on April 15th of 1995, I did this. Actually, it's not 1995. I've been keeping him since about 2001. So only 23 years of, daily ledger entries.
Yeah, that's fascinating to learn that Otis Driftwood keeps a ledger in his pocket.
Yeah. It's not in a pocket. I mean, it's like an 8 by, it's a regular lined, notebook.
So what are you into outside of like what we all know that you do? What I found fascinating doing research is your fascination in the Middle East. You've had your honeymoon in Iran. You just got back from Egypt and Dubai, I think, pretty recently.
Yep.
So traveling is a big part of your life. You just love to travel?
I like to get the wife out of the house every once in a while. Mm-hmm. But we went to Iran back in 2017. So it was still open back then before the gates once again slammed shut. I was there as part of a college tour. I'm a Yale graduate, and that was part of the Yale Educational Travel Program. So there were about 18 of us that went to Iran, and it was about, somewhere between 10 days, 2 weeks. We went to a bunch of different cities. It was fascinating and fantastic. We had a great time. My wife was very excited about going. My 2 daughters were worried that I was trying to get my wife beheaded because that was during, ISIS and doing all this stuff. Well, it turns out that ISIS is more Sunni Muslim and Iran is more, obviously Shia. And so there was no threats of beheading. So that was good. But it was a great trip. Since then, we've gone, we went up the Mekong River in Vietnam from Saigon, now, Ho Chi Minh City, up to Phnom Penh in Cambodia. They went from there to look at Angkor Wat, fabulous, ancient city that was, were discovered in the 1950s, maybe, that had been completely covered by the jungle there. And now it's just, it's a magnificent place to visit. And then just this past month, actually in January, Lucinda and I went to Egypt, which we loved, and then Jordan, and then Dubai, it was funny because we made the plan, and the travel agency cashed the check about a week before the Hamas invaded Israel, and that whole war began.
You're choosing all the right times to go to the Middle East.
It turned out that when we got to Egypt, we were told that, and this was in the beginning of January of this year, that tourism was down like 40%. Mm-hmm. Understandable. When we went to Jordan, we took a day down to the Dead Sea, and there are lots of big resorts on the beach of the Dead Sea, and so many of them were empty. Apparently, their tourism was down like closer to 90%.
Wow.
Yeah, because you could stand on the shore, the Jordanian shore of the Dead Sea, and look across, and there in the distance is Israel. So
and you could see it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So we do like to go to take these crazy trips every once in a while.
I'd love to go on more trips. I'm just petrified of airplanes. Did you ever have an issue with airplanes, or you never really had a problem with it?
I never really did.
I feel like it's not mastered technology. Like, I get it flies.
Yeah.
But the one thing that could go wrong is that it stops flying. And I feel like we haven't figured that part of the equation out yet.
Well, I mean, they've stayed aloft for me. The way I look at it is once you're up in the air, if the plane's going to crash, you're fucked. So you don't really have to get really worried about it because, you should have a good, life insurance plan. And beyond that, not much you can do. You can't jump up at the last minute. Like
in an
no
elevator.
Parachutes. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's basically it. So I think you just have to, put your trust in the, the mechanics and the pilots.
Right. Do you have any fears?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, I have children, so I'm always afraid for them, for their sakes. 2 daughters. Yeah, I have a lot of fears, crime, all kinds of just typical stuff.
You mentioned crime. I think Otis reminds me so much of Manson. Did you study Manson at all while preparing for the role of Otis, or did that just?
No, I never really did.
Yeah, the monologues and the type of I guess that would be on the writing at that point, but your portrayal of it was very Manson-y to me.
I did a play years and years ago in Los Angeles in the early 90s. I did a play called Timothy and Charlie, written by a guy named, I forgot his first name, Tim Riel, R-I-E-L or R-I-E-H-L. And it was based on the fact that there was a night way back when Timothy Leary and Charles Manson were side by side in solitary confinement in San Quentin. And so the playwright took that fact and turned it into a 2-act play. There were people dancing, and it was a crazy play. But I was cast not as Charles Manson. That went to an actor named Gil Gale, but I was cast as Timothy Leary, and so I played him pretty straight, because Timothy Leary was a Harvard professor. I mean, he's not a kook. I guess maybe his ideas were kooky at the time or whatever, but. So that was actually really cool. That was, I think, actually one of the performances. I think some of the family members showed up to view one of the one of the performances.
One of Leary's family members or Manson?
No, the family, Manson family, and they were it was a small theater, maybe 90 seat, and I think they were up. I was too busy, acting, but they were apparently up in the seats. Drinking wine and eating chicken. I don't know what they were doing, but apparently they came up to Gil at the end of the play, after the play, and they said, "Yeah, we're going to go up and we're about to go see Charlie. We'll tell him what we thought." And Gil was left with the uncertainty. Did they like it or did they not like it? Oh my God!
Yeah, that could be a quite ominous statement.
It was ominous. But I remember, and that was actually when I got in touch with the spirits of the theater for the first time. Every time I perform, I always hit my knee or knees sometimes, and always ask for the help of the spirits of the theater. And I remember we were rehearsing Timothy and Charlie, and our director. There was a bed, like a cot, on the set, on the stage, and I came in for a rehearsal, and I had some sandwich with me or something for lunch, and I remember sitting on the cot and having my sandwich, and our director, Mick Collins, looked at me and said, "Bill, you don't eat your lunch on the set. The set is a place to be revered. And you really have to respect the spirits of the theater. And if you respect the spirits of the theater, there's going to come a time, and it happens to all of us. It's going to come a time when you go up, meaning you're in the middle of a performance and you can't remember the next line. You go blank. You go up." And he said, if you're good with the spirits of the theater, if that moment ever comes, or when that moment comes, you can say, "Spirits of the theater, please help me," and they will whisper that line in your ear. And I was like, "Whoa!" So I obviously got off the cot, got off the stage, sat in one of the theater chairs, finished my lunch, and Timothy and Charlie it was like warring monologues. Like Charles Manson would say, I took drugs because I wanted to, and he'd go off on his thing, and then Timothy Leary would respond with a more learned, take on drug use or sex or whatever it was. So it was these warring monologues. And one night, I was performing, Timothy Leary himself came to about 7 of our performances.
Oh, wow.
He loved it.
Oh, he approved.
Oh yeah, and we became pals actually. But there was one night when I was in the middle of saying whatever I was saying. In Act 1, we're more our personalities. In Act 2, we've taken acid, so now we're on a trip and really getting into it. And we were in Act 2, and I was saying some line, and I went up. But I had been good with Spirits of the Theater. I had, before I ever got on stage, every performance, took a knee, okay, Spirits of the Theater, Mm-hmm. And so I went up, and I, for a moment there's that panic of like, oh fuck. But then I relaxed, and I started to say, okay, Spirits of the Theater, I need your help. And because it was a monologue when we're tripping, what I did was I just repeated the last line that I did remember, like going, and just kind of acted like I was, tripping and crazy. And by doing it 2 or 3 times, the next line came.
Wow.
And, finished the performance. And the audience thought, yeah, he's tripping. Of course, he's going to repeat himself once or twice. So that was, I don't know where that story came from, but
And the line popped in your head like that.
yeah, just by repeating the last line.
What do you think that comes from? What do you think the source of that is?
Well, I mean, probably just because, somehow it just kind of triggers the brain, and whatever that mental block, total block, just disappears. Or maybe it was the Spirits of the Theater that whispered in my ear because I had been respectful. And to this day, these many years later, I always, say a little prayer, or just a little prayer to the Spirits of the Theater. That Otis voice said, get out of the way, Hollywood, I got this, when, at the beginning of day 1 of 3 from Hell.
Yeah.
That's Spirits of the Theater.
And now, does it happen quite a bit, or were those like...
When I'm in peril.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish Spirits of the Theater would pay a little bit more attention to me.
Well, when you're in peril, and you need something above and beyond your own brain,
Right.
your own willpower, your own memory, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Because in the moment, it's a lot of pressure. Whether you're shooting a movie or you're doing a play.
Which one's harder?
Well, I would have to say for me, it's probably doing a play, because with a movie, of course, you're doing pieces, and you're doing scenes, and you're doing takes. And if you flub something, they just say cut, and you try it again until you get it right.
Yeah.
With a play, you're out there just doing it
In front of people.
Yeah.
Only one take.
Yeah. Because what you're doing is you're popping the balloon, you're breaking the illusion, and that's tough, and that also impacts, of course, the playwright, the director, the other actors, So you try not to do that, but that's why in theater you have what is called rehearsal, and in most of the movies I've done, whenever they actually rehearse, I'm shocked, I'm surprised. Because usually it's like, just show up and do it. You don't have rehearsal. The only time I really did rehearsal per se, it wasn't even rehearsal, it was when I did Repo, the Genetic Opera. And what we did under the great direction of Darren Bousman, but what we did was we recorded all of, it's an opera, so everything is sung. And we ended up, the first thing we did in production was we recorded all of the songs. And then literally a month or 2 later, we recorded the songs in North Hollywood outside of L.A., or part of L.A. And then 2 months later, we went up to Toronto to shoot the movie. And so everything we did was lip-synced when we actually did the production, because we'd already put all of the songs on tape. So that was kind of rehearsal in a way.
Was that your first musical?
First movie musical, yeah.
Yeah. Was that difficult?
No, not really. The difficult part of Repo was that we had a wonderful choreographer, and I have, I'm a really good freelance dancer, but when you say, okay, now step, move and spin and step, and I end up with 2 left feet. So what I did for my character Luigi Largo, immediately when I saw, oh my God, this is going to be complicated choreography, and I said, you know what, my character is always out of step. I established that. Yeah. They went, oh, that's a great idea.
Character development right there.
So that was how I kind of protected myself. Yeah. And it's funny because, I'm still working, which is great, in terms of as an actor, I'm still working. And people say, how come you're still working? And I say, in reverence to my genre, I say, in horror movies, the older and uglier you get, the more work you're offered.
The better, yeah.
So that helps a lot.
How often do directors approach you that are just fans of you?
Often enough. They usually go through my manager, Judy Fox, and she, vets like the serious offers versus the, wouldn't it be great offers. And, I like all offers. I think it's pretty cool. I love the genre. I love young directors. I love encouraging them. We were talking about some of my favorite movies, Get Out, Midsummer. There's some really, that's the one thing about the horror genre. It keeps inventing itself. You never really get tired. There are so many subgenres and so many wonderful ways to make political statements. I think, what a mind blower when George Romero came out with Night of the Living Dead. And there was so much, in there, race, Vietnam. There was so many different things going on that just made that so interesting a movie. Mm-hmm. In addition to some zombies eating people, which is also very cool. But, I think the horror genre has attracted so many smart people. Again, Rob Zombie, Guillermo del Toro, Tobe Hooper, Wes Craven, Ridley Scott. You name it. And, there's some very, very, because it's a wonderful canvas and you can tell so many different stories.
And it's a lot more forgiving too. The script doesn't need to be as tight, and it doesn't, it's one of the only genres in the world where a bad movie could be really good. Yeah.
Well, that's true too.
I was going to list off a couple examples. I don't want to fucking offend anybody though.
Yeah, don't do it.
Well, Bill, I really appreciate your time coming into the Crypt today. It means so much. I'm sure you hear it at conventions all the time, but I grew up on your films, and yeah, man, you coming into the studio is literally the highlight of probably the entirety of this show.
Glad to be here. And as Chop Top would say, lick my plate, you dog dick.
Amazing. I was hoping
that was a total improv, by the way.
And you ad-libbed their horny Barbara in Night of the Living Dead as well.
They've been dead a long time. Yeah, it's just to pester Barbara.
Yeah.
The great Patricia Tallman.
Yeah, and you've just got such a natural gift for this. The fact that, I don't know. And, honestly, it kind of serves as a sign, too, to not try and put too much thought into what you're doing. As long as you like it and as long as it feels good, hopefully something will come out of it. And I think you are, the picture perfect scenario for that. You really just did it for your interests.
Well, that's also about being in the moment. And if you're in the moment, if you're not thinking, what is my best side and what's that line again, that takes you out of the moment. And I know it's almost a cliche, in the moment. But when you're in the moment, when you're actually in the story, when it's real for you, the characters are real, the situation is real, that's when stuff shows up. Mm-hmm. Because, most of the time, scripts are, very important, especially in with some directors, some genres, you need to say every word exactly as it's written. But sometimes in low budget horror movies, there's a little bit more leeway, a little bit more freedom to say, to speak the words or to make them yours, or to sometimes I like to think of myself as a reality scout. Like, okay, Bill, you're this character. Go in there and see what you can find. And
right.
And sometimes when you get in there, you see things that maybe the writer hadn't anticipated based on, the interaction with another actor or, whatever the props are or whatever the story is, and sometimes that stuff just comes trippingly off the tongue. And I love it. I mean, I can work either way. I can work like every word must be spoken. Or, hey, if you come up with something great, I think Rob was very good about that because Rob wrote a fantastic script, but if you had some idea, he'd certainly entertain it. And if it worked, great. And if it didn't, see you later. But, you weren't penalized for that. So that was good.
Bill, again, man, I really do appreciate you coming into
Yeah.
the crypt today. We've got a flight to make here in the next hour or so.
Yeah, let's get out of here.
I really appreciate your time, man. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Thank you.
We're going
Really
to
good
give
be
the
here.
signature piece.
Yeah.
Later, everybody. Catch you guys
I mean,
next time.
Oh, yeah. Hey, EXIT. Exit.